All right, we're going to be getting started. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on a school night. I know that it's an effort to attend yet another Zoom presentation, and I really hope that you find this worth your effort. We had a lot of fun and put a lot of work into putting the presentation together, and we're excited about it. Teach Diabetes, Foster a Healthy Lifestyle, geared towards grades 6 to 12. This is a 1-hour session. It is sponsored by GBH, which is Boston's public media station. I'm Carolyn Jacobs, and I'm in the education department at GBH. GBH is the largest and oldest public media station in the network of public media stations across the country. We are known for our productions in part, and those are iconic productions that you see on stations all across the country like Masterpiece, Nova, American Experience, Frontline, and lots of kids programs. So we're sponsored by GBH as well as PBS LearningMedia. And PBS LearningMedia is a free website. It's a co-production of GBH and PBS. I bet some of you are familiar with it, maybe not. If you are and have a favorite resource or want to comment on it to kind of inspire your colleagues to explore the site, please do so in the chat box. The site is free. You are welcome to browse it without signing in. But if you do sign in, which takes just a few seconds, then you are able to use the site to its max and save resources to folders, have your students do interactive lessons and save their work, download resources, etc. So I'm going to show you some things that are on the site, but pertinent to what we're talking about tonight, the diabetes resources that we have produced are published on PBS LearningMedia, and you'll be learning much more about those. To acknowledge Veterans Day, which is today, I just wanted to call attention to two collections of resources that are on PBS LearningMedia. You'll have the links to these. We have Angelica in the background who will be posting things in the chat box and responding to some of your questions. A collection of resources is really a curated group of resources that you find on the site. So you, through one banner, you have a whole list of resources in one place. And they're organized by topic or by the funder or for whatever reason, but these are two. And then there's also a very entertaining collection called All About the Holidays. And these are animated short videos. There are a lot of them, maybe 30 or 40 holidays, and Veterans Day is one of them. So there's a short clip that you might find a use for with your students about Veterans Day. All right, so we are going to concentrate tonight on Blood Sugar Rising, America's Hidden Diabetes Epidemic, which was a 2-hour documentary premiered in April of 2020, just a few months ago. And it can be streamed on this website. So you can stream the entire program. You don't need to be a member or logged in or anything, and it is available to you. And I'm curious if any of you have already seen the show. You might put any reactions you have to that in the chat also. So I'm joined this evening by Judith Vecchione, Chris Dietlin, and Karen Washington. Judith Vecchione is the executive producer at GBH Boston, where her most recent project was Blood Sugar Rising. And in her long career, Judith has contributed to major PBS documentary series, including Vietnam, A Television History, Nova, American Experience, and Frontline. She was a series senior producer on the award-winning Eyes of the Prize. And her next project is American Veteran, a 4-part series on military veterans across our history. And that is scheduled to air in November of 2021. So welcome, Judith, and thank you. Chris Dietlin. Chris collaborates with, she's part of the GBH education team. She collaborates with GBH broadcast projects like NOVA, Frontline, American Experience, etc., and PBS and external partners to develop and oversee the production of media resources for PBS LearningMedia. So a lot of what you're going to see tonight is under the leadership of Chris, the production of it. The resources are for a wide range of audiences from pre-K to 12. And also we have a lot of professional development that Chris has been responsible for too on the site. And then Karen Washington. So Karen Washington is our local celebrity because she is in the videos that you're going to see. Karen is a farmer, an educator, an activist. She is co-owner of a farm called Rise and Root in Chester, New York. She's a food advocate. She co-founded Black Urban Growers, acronym is BUGS, an organization supporting growers in both urban and rural settings. And in 2012, Ebony Magazine voted her one of the most 100 influential African Americans in the country. And in 2014, she was the recipient of the James Beard Leadership Award. She serves on boards of the New York Botanical Gardens, Soulfire Farm, the Mary Mitchell Center, Black Farmer Fund, and Farm School New York City. And she is a very busy lady, and we're thrilled to have her. Thank you, Karen. So our plan for tonight is Judith is going to kick things off with a little background about the documentary, Blood Sugar Rising. Chris is going to come on to talk specifically about the resources that are drawn from the program and other projects and published on PBS LearningMedia. And then Karen and I are going to have a little conversation about her background, her good food activism, and some of her strategies to engage with students and the work that she's done in coaching teachers. And we'll be looking for you to put in the chat box things that you've tried and that you react to when you hear some of Karen's ideas. So I'm going to turn it over to Judith now.
Thank you, Carolyn, for inviting me to take part in this webinar. And thank you to all the educators who are participating in this gathering. I come from generations of teachers. My mother taught high school. She taught math in high school. My grandmother taught business, and you don't know it, but many of you learned to write script from my grandfather, who taught handwriting and was the calligrapher for one of the most influential methods of teaching cursive writing. This same grandfather connects me as well to diabetes. He lived a long life with type 2 diabetes, which he controlled with insulin shots and exercise and careful portions of what he would and would not eat. So education and diabetes, if you'll pardon the pun, are in my blood. I began thinking about a diabetes film around 10 years ago. This was a story that no one was covering and that was on track to change all our lives. So now I'd like to show you the opening to the film we made, Blood Sugar Rising, and then talk a bit more about our thoughts of how the film can help you explore diabetes in America in the classroom. Please roll the film.
In the United States, it is estimated that there's about 100 million people with diabetes and pre-diabetes, 100 million people in the country affected by a blood sugar problem.
The economic impact of diabetes is devastating. We spent almost $350 billion on diabetes in the United States last year.
Diabetes, a chronic disease that's notoriously difficult to control. It can maim and even kill. A generation ago, less than 3% of Americans had diabetes. Today, it's almost 10%.
It is now predicted that half of the US population will have either diabetes or pre-diabetes by the year 2025. Half.
Living with diabetes today is a story of new discoveries about our food environments, and choices.
As a 7-year-old coming from a third world country and getting free candy, I was like, yo, I'm so down for America right now. Like, this is tight.
It builds on exciting new progress in drugs and technologies that have made the disease more manageable.
This device is around the corner, and that's really what we're trying to do, is get much better therapy to people that requires much less of their participation and provides much better care.
And it reveals the terrible struggles that so many with diabetes still have, day in and day out.
So they was looking at me like, how are you even standing here on your feet? You're supposed to be in a coma.
So when we think about the impact to the system, way too many emergency room visits, way too many amputations. Why isn't there a war on diabetes?
So the whole film is 2 hours that explore the stories of people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and also look at people who are working on understanding the disease. This whole film, as we've said, is available for free on streaming video, and it's been a tremendous success so far, with more than 500,000 views on pbs.org and YouTube, on top of the 2.3 million viewers that saw the film in its premiere broadcast. And this is why I think so many people are interested. You don't have the film to look at to tell you that, so I have to tell you it. First, this is an urgent problem for all of us, not just the 100 million people with diabetes and prediabetes. The rapidly increasing number of people with diabetes mean the disease is affecting us all, financially, emotionally, and in terms of medical resources. For years, it's been the 7th largest cause of death in the US every year. And keep in mind that the impact is even greater now in the coronavirus pandemic, as diabetes is a tremendous risk factor for COVID-19. So the time to talk about diabetes is really now. As we filmed Blood Sugar Rising, we heard over and over again stories about my father lost a leg to complications, and I'm struggling to keep my blood sugars under control. One of the people who shared her story was our narrator, the brilliant actor Esapatha Murkison from Law and Order and Chicago Med. That was one of the surprises about making this film, how open people were to sharing their stories, especially in the rural communities and communities of color that are disproportionately hit by the disease. So the stories in Blood Sugar Rising also connect with social justice issues, something that many students are interested in. Second, and this is another surprise, this is a time of great excitement in the diabetes communities. There are the most amazing advances being made in understanding the disease biology and offering new tools for helping individuals manage their disease, and also in providing new information for the next advances. Here's just one example. About 3 years ago, the first of the next generation continuous glucose monitoring devices started hitting the market. The key technology is a sensor worn on the back of the upper arm, about the size of a quarter, that measures blood sugar every minute. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's a picture of Theresa May. At the time, she was Prime Minister of Britain, and she's wearing her continuous glucose monitor, or CGM. You can see it on her arm. She checks her glucose by waving a handheld reader it's about the size and shape of an iPhone 4. It's really small, over the sensor. And then she can confidently take insulin to lower her blood sugar levels or eat something to raise them. Next slide. So those are 2 reasons why we hope you'll be teaching diabetes and using Blood Sugar Rising in your classroom: the urgency of the problem and the excitement of new approaches. We think that Blood Sugar Rising will be effective for students because we're telling positive stories of courage and hope. Our film recognizes that the emotional impact of real human stories is the cornerstone of the experience for viewers. And we know that audiences, students and adults, can best connect with the most complicated and intimidating information when it's delivered in the framing of a human story. So that's what we work to achieve with Blood Sugar Rising. Next slide. One story is the story of Ed Damiano, who began working on continuous glucose monitors about 20 years ago, when his infant son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. His wife, who is a pediatrician, told him, "Our lives have changed forever," and it was true. Next slide. There's Gretchen Carvalho, who says, type 2 diabetes runs like a river through her family. She works now as a poet mentor in an innovative program that encourages young people to use their artistic skills to teach about diabetes. The poems they produce are just amazing. Next slide. And you're going to be meeting in this webinar, as we've told you, another person in our film whose story connects with type 2 diabetes. Karen Washington is a delightful and outspoken community activist in the Bronx. Her form of activism is urban gardening, which she sees as a direct assault on the devastating rates of diabetes in her community. Next slide. So I can keep talking about the film. Of course, filmmaking is a totally consuming process, but more and more we see that making the film is the start of our work, not the end. More and more we see ourselves as multi-platform, reaching people with important ideas wherever they are. And we especially want to extend our stories into the realm of schools-based education. And that's where you come in. So thank you. And I pass the mic now to Christine to talk about Blood Sugar Rising in the classroom.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to have you here. The Blood Sugar Rising collection on PBS LearningMedia features a mix of video resources that focus on the science behind diabetes and the social aspects that have been contributing to the rapid rise of the disease, particularly in children and people of color. The resources are for grades 6-8 and can extend to high school. They're aligned to health and science standards. 9 video resources are featured in the collection. Several are profiles of people with diabetes who are of varying ages, experience, and backgrounds, as Judith was just discussing. These profiles are intended to help students engage with the material. All of the resources in the collection have been vetted by teacher advisors, subject matter expert, as well as Judith, whom you just met, the executive producer of the film. The support materials include teaching tips, which offer vocabulary and terms, as well as guiding questions for viewing the videos. These questions provide a way to frame, focus, and follow up on the content in each video. We're in the process now of producing additional materials that will be available in the coming weeks, this month and next. The background reading will provide a definition of diabetes, an explanation of the different types, and a description of the symptoms and causes. It's intended to help further steep you in the content, and depending on your class, you can decide if you want to distribute it as a reading to the students. The recommended resource list will provide a list of key organizations associated with diabetes across a wide range of topics. We're also in process of producing 2 lessons. One is something that we're calling an activator interactive lesson, and the other is a lesson plan. The activator will be a short 4-screen lesson intended to jumpstart the first day of the more in-depth lesson plan. In the activator, the students will play the role of epidemiologists studying the disease and will engage with videos from the collection, as well as with public health data. Students will learn about diabetes trends and will screen videos from the collection to help them put a face to the disease. The lesson plan will utilize the Activator interactive lesson and some of the videos in the collection. It will model how to incorporate these media assets into the classroom. In the first part of the lesson plan, students will grasp the increasing prevalence of type 2 diabetes, as well as the connection between insulin and blood sugar, and what happens when blood sugar regulation goes awry. Students also will investigate lifestyle behaviors that contribute to the risk of type 2 diabetes and ways to minimize these risks. Finally, students will apply their new understanding of the social aspects of the diabetes epidemic by crafting a plan of action to address health inequity issues in their community. We always try to end lessons with something that is active for students to do in their own community. So we wanted to show you a few short excerpts from some of the videos in the collection. This first one features an animation that describes diabetes and the role of insulin. As you watch, think about the question in the chat and feel free to respond to it while watching. The question is, what happens inside the body with each type of diabetes?
Diabetes undercuts one of the most basic functions of our bodies, our ability to break food down into nutrients, including the sugar, glucose, that provides energy.
Okay.
The hormone that manages sugar levels is insulin.
So think of insulin as the medicine that you can't live without, right? Like a key that unlocks the door to your cells and allows the glucose to enter your cells. That keeps the level of sugar in your blood in check and your cells nourished.
This insulin-glucose cycle is disrupted in diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, the immune system attacks and destroys the part of the pancreas that makes insulin. In type 2, the pancreas makes too little insulin and the body resists the insulin it has.
It's really obvious when your blood glucose is too low why that's dangerous. You know, you can't breathe, you can't survive. You won't live very long if you have blood sugar that's too low. Blood sugar that's too high is equally dangerous, if not more dangerous, over time.
Type 1 is genetic, perhaps triggered by a virus or other environmental factors. Type 2 is triggered by many factors: the person's genes, their environment, getting too little exercise, gaining too much weight, eating too much unhealthy, sugary foods.
Diabetes is truly a silent disease. It could take up to 15 years for someone with diabetes to develop the first symptoms that are related to high blood sugar levels.
Thank you, Carolyn. Someone in the chat asked if the videos are available in Spanish. No, unfortunately they are not. So
the film is available in Spanish.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yes, it is in Spanish and in English, but the PBS LearningMedia is not.
Would is the Spanish version at that same link, or could you put the link in the chat, Judith, to the Spanish version?
It is in the same link.
If you go to that same link? Okay.
Yes, it's there.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so this in this next video, we meet Gretchen, who describes how her family has a history of diabetes and how she uses poetry to help cope with its impact on her and her family. And as you watch, think about the question in the chat and feel free to respond to it while watching. The question being, what phrases or ideas struck you most in Gretchen's poem and why?
Hi, my name is Gretchen Carvajal. I'm a Youth Speaks alum. I'm now a poet mentor for the organization. And so just, yeah, I just feel real blessed to be in the building. My mother's side has diabetes. Diabetes is more and more a curse that we thought we brought to ourselves. We try to break it with a spell, a potion, and a ritual. What is insulin but a potion? What is a spell but a diagnosis? We take a tiny needle and prick our finger. What is a blood sacrifice to a blood test? I moved to America in 2001. This is like peak early 2000s, second grade Halloween. Trick-or-treating was like a brand new experience for me, which was like, oh yeah, you're gonna go around and people are gonna be free candy. And I was like, what? As a 7-year-old coming from a third world country and getting free candy, I was like, yo, I'm so down for America right now. Like, this is tight. Diabetes runs in my family through my mother's side. Her mother had it, her sister had it as well, and then my mother has it too. And now my older sister has it as well. So the Bigger Picture project is a collaboration between Youth Speaks and Dr. Dean Schillinger, in which we do workshops based around health and food accessibility with our young folks, with poetry. So it sounds a little like disconnected, but it's really crazy how connected it is. Your relationship with health is also your relationship with your community. Your relationship with health is also your relationship with your family and with your body.
So gonna transition to like 10 minutes of writing.
So what do you reach for when you're hungry, and or what reaches for you?
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyone would like to share, bless us with some words?
Okay, you're just staring at me. I want to be able to eat without second guessing, without thinking about a smaller version of myself, without thinking about food as a weapon or a setback. I want to be able to be hungry and eat without feeling like I'm killing myself. My body is a landmine of insecurities, my bloodline a generation of curses, a system that nobody has been able to break. When I'm hungry, I think about the bodies of women in my life and serving and eating last.
I really liked the line when you said food as a weapon. What did that mean to you?
Yeah, like all the intersections of my identity are what, like, food is a weapon. As a Filipino and somebody from the East Bay who doesn't have that access, that's like a direct threat. But it's hard to grasp, like, what does that violence look like? And it's like, it looks like my whole family having diabetes and my mom having glaucoma because of her high blood sugar. And like, it looks like this and this and this, you know? But it's like, for people who don't go through that and don't have, it's like, it's not even that bad. All you have to do is like do those minuscule choices when it's like you literally don't have those choices sometimes. Filipino food is like so good, but it's also like, yeah, just a mix of a lot of like different struggles that we've been through. I think my family avoids talking about diabetes because they know it's a problem that they have to address. A cycle of not being concerned about your health. Like, I think that's a big cycle in my family. These things could be inevitable, but there are other things that are also preventable. When I think about like ending the cycle of diabetes, it's always gonna be my family.
So yeah, very, very moving piece. And how, and Jennifer, you mentioned how you love how she relates everybody to food to her identity. Yes. Yeah, so true. So the next video features Karen Washington, who's our guest speaker this evening and who's coming up next. This is one of the profile videos and it's almost 6 minutes, so let's not play the whole thing now, but Carolyn, if you just want to maybe show the first couple of minutes.
In the Bronx, one of the #1 diet-related diseases is type 2 diabetes. Everyone knows a family member, a friend, a colleague who suffers from type 2 diabetes, which can be prevented. This is the tale of two cities. Here in the Bronx, we are surrounded by unhealthy food. We had the bodegas. You open the door, and the first thing that hits you are the racks of cookies and cakes and candies and sodas. And then you go into more affluent neighborhoods. And I walk into the store, and there are the vegetables. Here are the healthy food options. But the question I ask is why? Why does it have to be like that? Why don't people have access to food? Why is it they can't afford, quote, fresh vegetables? Why isn't that supermarkets or the stores don't want to come into low-income neighborhoods? And so people are now calling our community food deserts. And it's like, wait a second, you're getting it wrong because we do have food. What we don't have is healthy food options. I moved to the Bronx back in 1985. Across the street was an empty lot. And I see a man with a shovel and a pick. And he says, I'm thinking about putting a garden. Ooh, I was so excited. I said, oh, can I help? I was so excited because a garden? Wow, that would make the neighborhood really, really look good.
That's a very suspenseful ending there. We're leaving you hanging, and Karen will explain more, but you got to watch the whole piece because it's just phenomenal to hear about how she gets involved with the garden and farming and working with kids, and it's just wonderful. But one last screen for the collection before we move on to Karen, which is we wanted to point out that also in the collection is a section with related resources. And these are resources from a project called In Defense of Food. And it's designed to help students learn more about healthy eating. In case you're familiar with the food writer Michael Pollan, he's one of those interviewed in the videos. And they're worth checking out as well. They have some great content in there. So that's a tour of the collection. Be sure to check back later this month and next for those additional resources that I mentioned, the background reading, the list of resources, and the Activator interactive lesson and the lesson plan. And now I'm turning it back to Carolyn, who will introduce Karen.
So Karen, you've seen Karen on screen, and we've gotten to know her a little bit through our talks about the rehearsal and whatever, and she is an inspiration. So Karen, why don't you just talk a little bit about your background? The clip that we showed kind of left everybody hanging with the genesis of the Garden of Happiness. And then you could also touch on your other work with the farmers in the community center.
So good evening, everyone. Thanks for being patient, and hats off to teachers because my daughter is an educator too at Gwinnett County in Georgia. So hats off to teachers because you do make a difference. So believe it or not, I didn't grow up being a farmer. I grew up in New York City. I had no aspirations of even thinking about farming. So I got started, as you saw in the picture, through gardening, through a community garden. Professionally, I was a physical therapist. So let me just say that, physical therapist. And I had so many of my patients who had diet-related diseases, especially type 2 diabetes. And what was so ironic about it is that most of my patients who are Black and Latinx, came from farms, grew up on farms. And so I could never understand, why they went from the land and now have these diet-related diseases such as type 2 diabetes. But in fact, we know what the problem is the fact that a lot of the subsidized charity-based food system ends up in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And so by becoming a gardener and a farmer, got together with people in my community and started a community-based farmers market. We're going into our 16th year. It's for community gardens, for rural farmers. And our model is to make sure that people in all areas have access to fresh produce. And from there, I took my journey, retired from physical therapy in 2014, and started farming with my friend Rising Root Farm. We have 3 acres up in Chester, New York, and we continue to be a force to be reckoned with in terms of making sure that people have access to fresh, healthy food. And besides that, I do a lot of grassroots organizing with the Mary Mitchell Center, which is based in the Bronx. We have a tolerance of no sugary fruits, no sugary drinks, cakes or cookies allowed, or sodas allowed in this building. And also they have a food justice group of teenagers that are really looking at food justice through the lens of activism. So that's about me. I got some questions and stuff. So
yeah,
let's
Karen,
talk.
let me just ask you one other question before we get started with the more of a conversation. We didn't see in the video, although people can watch that resource clip, you interacting with school groups at the Garden of Happiness. So I'm just reminding you to either talk about that, your experience with that, and weave that in however you'd like. But we do have some conversation starters that Karen uses and some ideas, and we'll go through that as she shares stories. And you're welcome, please, to react in the chat or give us your ideas also.
Yes, so just think about it, folks, when we talk about the food system. Who are the biggest consumers when it comes to food? Children. It's a $1 billion business, marketing to children to buy those cookies and candies and cakes that have the color of fruits and vegetables, but have empty calories. And so I've been working with a lot of school children, first of all, that want to come to the garden because there's a relationship between food and health and growing food. And so some of the questions, I ask them from time to time is like, well, how many people, first of all, heard of the word diabetes? And so majority of people in my neighborhood, young people, will raise their hand because they know they have so many people within their family members that have type 2 diabetes. The next question I'll ask, well, do they take any medication? What are some of the treatments that they have? And a lot of them will say it's either medication, or a lot of them have succumbed to, type 2 diet-related diseases, amputations, end-stage renal diseases. A lot of children know about that. And so another question that I ask children is like, so what are you doing to change family diets? Because a lot of them will tell you that their parents either use too much sugar or too much salt, and that they know the difference when it comes to eating healthy versus when it comes to eating junk food. And so these are some of the conversations I have with young kids, because believe it or not, they know more than we expect them to know. And so it's really good to start that conversation about where, you are what you eat, how many people in the family have diet-related diseases such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and heart disease. And then also, what are you doing to change the family's diet? Let's go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. And so I really like to start off when I talk to children about their relationship to food is start from the beginning. Start about, how do we get our food? Where does it come from? And a lot of communities of color have been left out of the conversation when it comes to agriculture. And as an African American, I never got agriculture in school, was never taught. My reference to agriculture was with slavery. And I tell people, slavery is part of my history. It doesn't define who I am. And so a good book to sort of talk about the influence of the African American experience here in the United States is this book called Farming While Black. And I say that, I have put a plug because I did the foreword. I say that because as an African American, I never knew why we were brought here. The story that has been told throughout centuries is the fact that we were brought here because of labor. But you know what, folks? The real reason why we were brought here is because of our knowledge of agriculture. We brought the seeds in our hair to feed this country. We brought the tools and innovation of agriculture and irrigation to work the soil in this country. And so when you tell young Black and brown children that you are responsible for the food that we're eating, that we were the ones, the enslaved and indigenous people, we were the ones that fed this nation, all of a sudden young people experience a positivity of being part of the experience of agriculture here in this country. Very, very important. So all you history teachers out there, it's important to put in agriculture within the concept of the fact that it was people of color, enslaved Africans and indigenous people who were the foundation when it comes to the food system in this country. It's an eye-opening experience. Next slide.
I think that is so innovative, and I'm curious if other people have approached it that way, or if this is a new idea to you. I think it's right on, because you're really orienting the kids to history and helping them identify. So really good. Yep.
And so, you know, when I speak to children, believe it or not, they know a lot. Some of the things that you can do, because it's hard, first of all, in communities of color, it's hard to talk about eating healthy when there's so many social issues that are out there that families have to face. And so some of the things that I try to use, some of the tools that I try to use when starting a conversation about getting people to eat healthy and to talk about type 2 diabetes is talk about getting a conversation about traditional food. Because a lot of us have that traditional food. For me, it has been collard greens. To a lot of my Latinx people, it's, you know, it's rice and beans, it's, you know, salsa, it's that cilantro, it's that papalo, papiche, tomatillas, you know. And so we have so many occasions that we can start talking about bringing in the conversation around food and health. Another thing I really talk about with children is like, so what's your favorite vegetable? You know, what's your favorite vegetable? You know, what's your favorite fruit? And a lot of times people will go, especially they will go with the sweet fruits and vegetables. You know, they will go with the mango, papaya, stuff like that. But again, it's the conversation that you want to have when it comes to talking about, you know, getting that conversation about food and produce. Another thing I talk about, like, oh, so who in your family cooks? Is it your mother? Is it the father? Is it the grandma? You know, and start having that, because believe it or not, a lot of kids do help their family cook. I mean, that's how I learned. I learned from watching my mom. We have a holiday coming up pretty soon, where my daughter and myself, you know, we get together in the kitchen and we do some cooking and we exchange stories. And I think what is so important about the work that I do is storytelling that I get from my neighbors, from my patients. And what I tell young people, I say, y'all got the Samsung Galaxy phones, y'all got the iPhones. If you are lucky to have parents and grandparents that lived on farms or grew up on farm, capture that story. Capture that story, how they were part of the land, how they grew food, how their father or mother lived to be 100 years old, and they were never sick a day in their life, how they would go out into the field. They didn't have the bodegas, they didn't have supermarkets. They would go out into the fields and get the food and cook it. And so we need to have those conversations, which is lost. As we've gotten away from the land, you can see what has happened. We have lost our power. We have lost our power. And as a result, we have allowed the government and lobbyists to dictate the type of food that we're going to eat. And as a result, what you see in a lot of low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color, an industrial food system that has put in its place processed food, junk food, and fast food.
Karen, I'm going to flip to the next slide for some activity suggestions, but there's an interesting question in the chat, and it's related to how to even start as a science teacher talking about the history of African Americans and farming.
You know what, the best thing I tell people, you know, back in the day, you'd be surprised, we used to have like what's called international lunch or dinner, where you have kids bring in something from their culture to sort of bring in the conversation of inclusiveness and then also pride. And we don't have that. And so if you want to start talking about history, talking about ethnicity, talking about culture, set aside a day where you're asking your students, you know, bring a dish that is prominent in your culture, and let's share it and let's talk about it. And in some instances, you can bring the child and the parent to come in and have that conversation. The best way to entertain any group is around food. Great question. Any other questions?
Not yet, but you may want to comment on some of the other activities up here on the screen that you have tried and how.
Oh yeah, so let me tell you a great one to do, folks, educators. Have your children go to the store and bring to the class the honey buns, the strawberry shortcakes, the blueberry muffins. Bring them to the class, homework assignment, and then have them read the ingredients out loud. And let's see if they can get through the 4th ingredients without stumbling the words. And then finally, where is the strawberry and the blueberry? Or what is the honey bun made of? That is a good exercise to do, because when you have a child read off those ingredients and then cannot pronounce, you're saying to yourself, wait a second, I'm putting ingredients in my body that I can't pronounce, and I don't know what they're doing to my body. But you can also look at what's usually at the top, which starts with is sugar. So anything that has glucose, sucrose, any of the OSE at the end, OS, is sugar. And when you see dextrose, when you see that, you know it is high in sugar. And all the healthy stuff is not even in there, because then it's mixed with dye. So that's a good thing to do. Another thing that we tell our children to do, go into a grocery store. Go into the grocery store, go to the produce department and ask the produce manager, so where did this come from? Now, I had one of my children ask the produce manager, so where this particular fruit or vegetable, where did it come from? And you know what the produce manager said? Oh, it just came from the truck. Duh. And again, our relationship to where food comes from. And then also go into, especially in my neighborhood, you go into a low-income neighborhood and you say, so can you tell me where the healthy food sections are? And a lot of them will not, a lot of our neighborhoods don't have a healthy food section. But if you go into a predominantly white, affluent neighborhood, they got the organic section, they have the healthy food section, and it's something that we need to fight for.
Great. Karen, we're running out of time, and there might be some more comments that come in the chat box. We're about 5 minutes before the close, so we're going to move forward. But I really appreciate you sharing your experience and some tips. I know that when we talked before, you mentioned that things have changed over the years, that kids are sometimes more aware of what they eat and what's in what they eat, but the statistics speak for themselves. Diabetes is on the rise. So people might be more aware, but it's not translating into action. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you very, very much. So we're going to wind down now. A couple of just housekeeping things. We will send out the recording link along with the link to the slides and lots of the links that we have referenced today. It will be in an email that goes out to everyone who registered for the webinar. And we try and get that out tomorrow. The latest it will be Friday, we'll see. So just a reminder that the resources that we've shown you tonight are on pbslearningmedia.org, free website. I wanted to just call your attention to some other collections on the site that are of interest to science teachers and some of this to health teachers also. So these are, we draw heavily from Nova to create our resources. Again, these are short clips, 2 to 4 minutes typically. So we're taking a full-length program and creating short clips. Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms is a wonderful collection for K-12. It's a collaboration between GBH and NASA, and we have produced many resources using NASA imagery and NASA data and other sources to create resources for Earth and space science, and it goes across K-12. So check that out also. Another example I wanted to call attention to, it is not only Veterans Day, but it's also Indigenous Peoples Month, the month of November. And here are a couple of collections related to how climate change is adversely impacting populations of Indigenous people. The Alaska Native Perspective on Earth and Climate Change in the Pacific Islands. And then the Warrior Tradition is a very interesting collection. It tells stories about, it relates to the whole fact that Native Americans disproportionately enlist in US armed services more than any other ethnic group. And so it's related to that, the culture of that, and looking at their experience as being soldiers. Then let's see. All right, so I wanted to also bring you an interactive lesson. We haven't really talked about what an interactive lesson is, but I'll let you find that on the site, and we will have that link for you tomorrow. Nutrition, what your body needs. So if you go to PBS Learning Media and just put nutrition, what your body needs in the search bar, you'll find this. It's an interactive lesson where the students, this is geared towards middle school, walk themselves through a series of screens, watching videos. They're prompted to do short readings. They have activities, and it's a self-contained lesson. If you're on the site, the students can also save their work or not. It's totally up to you how you use it. But this directly relates to the topic tonight and also some of what Karen was talking about. These are just the learning objectives for the lesson. Vocabulary is hyperlinked in the lesson. There are hundreds of these interactive lessons on PBS Learning Media, but this was one I wanted to call your attention to. Okay, so we record all of our webinars, of which we have many, and we record them and we publish them on GBH Education YouTube page. And by virtue of joining us tonight and registering for this, you will be on our email list to receive notices of future events. And speaking of future events, we have one next week for grades 6 to 12 of interest to science teachers. H2O, the molecule that made us. And this will feature producers of resources, a teacher talking about how she uses resources, and this is all drawn from a program that was on public television. And then coming up in December, we have a program, a webinar on a diversity equity framework for science. And there will be more information as we get that together, and we'll have the registration link. But the registration link for the molecule that made us is live now. All right, we are very active on social media. Please follow us or repost what you see. And here's the survey link. So we'll put this in the chat also. The survey is created by our research department. it just very short, but we pay very close attention to the results, and it does inform our work and helps us do better. So please take the survey, and also at the end of the survey, if you would like, you can download a certificate acknowledging that you participated this evening. All right, I'm Carolyn Jacobs. Oh, it's my pleasure to be with you this evening. You are welcome to email me for any questions or comments, or you wanted to get in touch with one of the presenters, whatever. I can be your go-to person, and then I'll disseminate the information. I want to thank Judith Vecchione. I apologize again for the trailer of the Blood Sugar Rising not playing, but everyone has the link for that, and it is on the website. Christine Dietland, senior producer at GBH, for helping us introduce the resources, and Karen Washington for inspiring us to keep going and get the message to kids. So I'll keep the chat box open for another few minutes. Also, I wanted to acknowledge Angelica. Thank you, Angelica, for keeping up in the chat box. And if you have anything else you want to post in the chat, we'll keep this open for a few minutes, and then we'll wish you a good evening.